The Family Place Library's Parenting Little Ones Q&A. I'm Melissa Fellers. I'm a librarian at the East Library. And today our topic is behavior, development, and mental health. And we're joined by two panelists. We have Dayna Webb, who's a child and family mental health therapist with the Resource Exchange, and Windy Doan, who is the Behavioral Health Supervisor with CPCD Head Start. So Dayna, right now, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I have 3 kids of my own. They are just a little bit outside of the early childhood range now, which is strange for me because I started having my kids at about the same time that I started working in this role. So I have worked in early intervention for the last 3 years, or I'm sorry, 13 years. And I have been a mental health therapist for the last 11 in this field. That's just kind of where I fell, and I have loved it. So I know what it is to struggle as a parent of a young child, and I think that's really fueled my passion for this work that I do in supporting other parents to understand their children better and to know how to support them and their mental health. So I'd say that my focus and expertise is around all issues of parenting, but especially issues around attachment and children who've experienced trauma, but also just kind of, we call them neurodiverse populations. So kids with autism and ADHD, we're just starting to see some of those red flags emerge in the age group that I work with, which is kids under 3. So I guess that's about it. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I work in a program called Early Intervention, which is for kids from birth to age 3 who qualify through an evaluation with developmental delays or disabilities. And the company that I work with here in town is called the Resource Exchange. So I'm sure I'll talk a little. Oh, I guess should I talk about that now? Should I talk about what we do? Yeah, okay. So for any families who have any concerns about their children developmentally, like maybe they're not, they're at the age where other kids start to walk and they're not walking, or they're not saying words when some of their peers are, you can refer them for a free evaluation. And all of our services are free to families, which I think is a really great part of what we do. So you can get an evaluation. It's called a multidisciplinary evaluation, which means people from different fields of expertise are going to look at all of your child's areas of development. So even if your concern is their speech, they will look at all of their developmental areas, their motor skills and their social skills and their ability to start to do things for themselves. And they might even qualify in an area that hadn't been on your radar, but they can qualify for a variety of supports, and we have multidisciplinary teams that support every family. So even if you're working with a speech therapist, you have a whole team of knowledge and expertise that can be available to support you and to support your provider. So that's what we do.
Thank you. Windy, will you tell us about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Windy Doan, and I am the Behavioral Health Supervisor for CPCD Head Start. CPCD Head Start is a free preschool program that we have here in El Paso County. We currently have 69 classrooms, and we serve children from 0 to 3 in our Early Head Start program, and from 3 to 5 in our Head Start preschool program. So we provide free, it's a completely free program. You just have to apply for eligibility factors. We look at income, we look at military, and there's other risk factors that we look for that would make you eligible for our program. We do enroll year round, and part of the services that we provide at CPCD, we provide a holistic approach, and where I come in is with behavioral health. We work on the social emotional pieces of preschool, teaching children those social emotional skills, helping with challenging behavior both in the classroom as well as in the family home, supporting families that way and helping to connect them to community resources as appropriate as well. I currently lead a staff of 12 in my department, supporting all of these classrooms and families. I have been at CPCD, this will be my 4th year, but I have worked in and around families and children my entire career. I've also worked as a social worker for DHS. I've worked teaching parenting skills, life skills, worked in the family homes. I am a licensed counselor in Colorado, so I have experience doing therapy for mental health and drug and alcohol, children, families, kind of been all around this area, but this is where my passion really is with our little ones, and I love helping families. I'm a Colorado native, Colorado Springs native even, so I have no reason to leave, and I love what I do. I also have 2 children of my own. My daughter is about to turn 13 next month, which is a little heart-wrenching. And then my little guy, he's not so little, but he's 6. And so we're good. So we just got out of the very bottom of the early childhood, but much like Dayna, it's interesting because I started this work when he was itty bitty, and my kids get to benefit, although my almost teenager doesn't see it as a benefit, from what we do. So that's about me.
Thank you both. And then I want to just reiterate, especially because I know someone else entered the room after we started introductions, that feel free to submit any questions in the Q&A section, and then I will read these questions, and then we will go from there. So actually, we do have one question that was already posted, so I'm going to go ahead and share that with you, and then we can go from there. And this is the question that says, my 2-year-old is starting to bite my husband and I. He does it playfully, but he likes to latch his teeth in, which has bruised us and it hurts. We have 2 questions. First, do you have any recommendations on how to get him to release his bite without hitting him? And secondly, what is the best way to handle the situation when he bites? So I'll let you.
I bet you deal with this one a lot, Windy.
I was going to say, I know you do too.
Yeah. Do you want to jump in? I have some initial thoughts. Okay, go for it.
Supplement. How's that? 2-year-old biting's completely age-appropriate behavior. But and sometimes as a parent, that's nice to hear that that's typical. But when you're the one being bit, it doesn't feel typical, and it doesn't feel like it's something that just happens. But sometimes it's nice to hear, okay, this is kind of normal for a 2-year-old. Usually when 2-year-olds are biting, they're trying to express something that they don't have the words to do. And so it sounds like it's a playful thing. I think usually what we do is a lot of preventative work. So once you figure out kind of what is triggering the biting, what's that trigger? Are you wrestling? Are you laughing? Are you, teach them what you want them to do instead of the biting. So really kind of getting ahead of it. So, but back to the first part of the question, if they're already latched on, ow, that hurts me. And usually they'll, oh, okay, if they're not meaning to hurt you, right? And it doesn't sound like this little one is doing it out of anger per se. So just, ow, that hurts. And then you can talk about things that hurt. And so if instead of biting, why don't we tickle? Or why, and teach them what you want them to do. So that's a couple of the approaches I would take. Dayna, what would you add?
So I was right in line with you, Windy. My approach with any behavior in this age is trying to figure out what is behind the behavior, because like you said, Windy did a great job of saying it's usually some form of communication. Behavior is communication. And at this age, they often have very limited, if any, verbal skills or abilities to communicate, certainly a more complex concept. So it sounds like they're not doing it in anger, and it sounds like maybe it's, you said it was happening playfully. So I'm wondering, is there another commonality you can find there? Is it maybe you and your partner are distracted And typically he's biting when you are distracted. Sometimes as parents, we aren't even aware of the common theme, but if you guys can kind of pull back and try to evaluate, is there a common theme? Because if it's that you're distracted, maybe you guys are involved in a conversation and this is his way of saying, hey, I want to engage too. I want to be a part of the conversation. Then that makes it easier for you to help teach him a more appropriate way to engage with you. So totally agree with that. And then make that alternative fun too, because he's getting a lot of attention and reaction probably, even if you're trying to limit it from that biting. And so make the alternative just as fun and engaging. So, you know, give a lot of praise and make it a game, whatever the interaction that you want to teach him. And if he has limited verbal skills, make sure that it's more relying on nonverbal skills. So it can be, if he's trying to get your attention, it can be like, whoa, hello, you know, something that's like, I'm trying to get your attention, or just, you know, simple tapping on your leg, but find a way to make that fun for them, because sometimes it doesn't feel as fun as the biting. So yeah, those were my thoughts. And then there was part of that question, Windy, that I was trying to think about that was practical about how to get them to release their bite. Do you have any tips for that? I know that I've heard of one, but I was trying to remember.
I think it's more about our reaction. And the hard part is, a lot of it is that preventative, and then that after, really praising that they let go. Oh, you let go, thank you. Now that's not gonna, now that doesn't hurt anymore, or things of that nature. Really, and then when they do that, hey, yo, you got my attention. I see you waving your arms. Thank you. Now we can engage. And then, so I think, honestly, I'm drawing a blank on what else you can do, besides maybe tapping them, having the other partner, if they're in the room, tapping them, saying, oh, that looks like you're hurting, blah, blah, blah. Just touching them somewhere in their body, it may kind of bring them back.
And there is, someone wrote or typed in the chat, their husband is a music therapist and has been trained that when, say, someone is biting them, to move into the bite rather than away, to encourage, and which will encourage them just to unlatch.
I knew there was a trick, but I couldn't remember what it was.
Okay.
That was it.
Okay. Yay. Thank you. Okay. And we have another question. And this next question is, along the same lines, my sweet almost 2-year-old has started hitting mom and dad. It is not very common, but has happened out of frustration and also out of playfulness. So I'm not sure how to handle that. We just say no, please don't hit, we need to be gentle, etc.
I think that is are you okay if I jump in, Windy? Very typical, you know, parent, we all respond that way. No, don't do that. That's not what we want you to do. And what we often forget as parents is the second step. So there's nothing wrong with saying no, but when we give them a no, we need to give them a yes. So what do we want them to do? So for instance, if they're feeling angry, we aren't always good. And some of us as parents will probably admit that our kids showing us their anger is uncomfortable sometimes for us. And so that's something we as parents have to work on, because it's not fair to expect them not to have certain emotions. They will, they're natural, they're biological. They can't prevent having those emotions. So no emotion is bad, but also we don't want them to hit, like you're saying, that's not the behavior that we want from them when they're feeling mad. So we need to give them alternatives. So some of the things that I have worked with parents on, and you know, every family is different. What feels comfortable for one family doesn't always feel comfortable for another. So it really is finding what feels good to your family, but they do need to have permission to experience and feel that anger in some way. And anger is a very kinesthetic emotion. We feel it in our bodies. So we usually want an outlet with our body. So they need an outlet with their body. So one of the things is like stomping like a dinosaur. Oh, I'm a mad dinosaur. I stomp around and feel my anger. Because we're not hurting anyone, we're not hurting ourselves, or it might be roaring like a lion. I'm gonna roar because I'm mad, but I'm not hurting anyone with my mad. Or I know some people feel differently about this. I don't have a problem with punching a pillow. hitting a pillow is better than hitting a person, and it's much easier to then shift that once they're hitting the pillow instead of the person, to a different kind of behavior. So that can be, you know, sometimes we work on creating what's called like a safe space. So an area they can go to with pillows and blankets where they're safe and other people are safe, and they can go there and punch and kick and feel their feelings, and then get up when they're done. So it's not a punishment, it's not a timeout, it's just a place they can go to be safe with their feelings. So those would be some initial thoughts. What do you have to?
I totally agree. You took almost exactly what I wanted to say. Feelings, it's an energy in your body, right? And it's anger, yes, but it's also there's sadness and happiness, really big happiness sometimes, like when kids get really wound up and they're running around like crazy. I mean, none of us know what that looks like, right? But it's that energy that they need to get out. I had a kiddo once that we did jumping jacks when he got really riled up. And I'd be like, hey, grab my hands, let's jump. And he would just jump and jump and jump. And then we take a deep breath and then we talk about it. And I think that's that third piece of it. You know, we say, no, we don't want this. This is what we want. But then we have to reinforce it, and we have to practice it when they're not angry or frustrated or sad. So it's hitting that whenever they're regulated and calm and being like, oh, I got mad today. What do you think I should do when I get mad? Or acknowledging, again, praising the heck out of them whenever they do what you wanted them to do in the first place. But Dayna's absolutely right. I had a family that said stomping was unacceptable, but hitting a pillow was. So it's really about getting creative and what works for your kid. I had a kid that would just yell into a pillow. And then we could take some breaths, and then we could talk about it and figure out what's going on. And when they can't talk, sometimes 2-year-olds have this amazing ability to just throw the mother of all tantrums. And then they act like nothing happened, right? And we're still recovering as parents. Like, holy Anna, what was that? But they got the energy out. They're good now. And so we got to move along with that, right?
And we have another question. Let me move this on up. This next one is, my 2.5-year-old is more of like a sensory child, and one of the things I like to do is jumping. What can be done, or how can I reduce their sensory issues?
You want me to take this one? Okay. So sensory issues are one thing that we support in early intervention. So if you get really stumped, you might consider referring them for an evaluation if they're under 3, or that's also something that an occupational therapist in a clinic setting can support you with, because that's exactly what they will tailor to your child. So I can give some general ideas, but they really are able to tailor it, and what works for one kid often doesn't work for another. But in general, those kids who really like that jumping, that climbing, that crashing, they're really seeking to wake up their sensory system. So what's actually going on is that their brain doesn't respond to that sensory input in the same way that other kids might. And so they need really high impact activities to wake their brain up and say, okay, here's where I am in space, and here's where other things are in relation to me. That's basically what they're doing with the jumping and the crashing. So it really is about kind of finding the activities that, similar to the last question, that fit for them as their unique individual selves, and also for your family. So maybe you have a couch that is precious and you really don't want kids crashing on it, or that's a rule at your house that you don't want kids jumping on it. So let's think about other ways that they can get that jumping need met. Can you get a little mini trampoline? They have ones that like fit in the corner that they can jump, or can you take pillows or even couch cushions or something like that, and let them crash and jump and play on those. But having a designated space for those activities and setting limits and boundaries around that activity to say, this is where we do this. So, and having it readily accessible so that when they need it, they can seek it out. Because that's what we really want to teach them. We want to teach them the skills for, I'm feeling overwhelmed, so here's how I can help support myself.
Some other strategies that you can use are like wall pushes. Having some hands, like you can just print out a couple hands, or have them paint their hands, handprints, and put them on the wall, and they push against, it's heavy work. Pushing like that, if there's things that they can push or pull, or some of them really like turning. So for some of them, I've put like a figure 8, and there's something about turning sometimes with those sensory kids that it doesn't always have to be something heavy or something they're crashing into, but sometimes it's even just turning. So it's really going to be a lot of experimentation on what works, what engages your kid, like Dayna is saying. What will they buy into, and what will work in the context of your family. But even all kiddos need sensory experiences. So really any of these can work for any child. But the sensory kids, they love that stuff.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing you made me think of, Wendy, with that heavy work. Another idea that our occupational therapists always use is like, do you have a vacuum that you can just let them push down the hall? Or like, do you have a laundry basket that you can put stuff into, put some books in it and have them push it down the hallway and then push it back or pull it back? So those are some of the ideas that, you know, most anybody has something, or a cardboard box, and you can just put whatever you have in it that makes it a little heavy.
I was going to ask a question right now. Also, I talked with Dayna before we started about I had a child who suffered anxiety or separation issues from birth probably till 1st grade. Then he got a little bit better. So what are some things that you can do to deal with that, especially now when we're isolating more at home and then we start returning hopefully to normal?
So this is something that I get to work with a lot at preschool. Our Mondays or Tuesdays usually, and that's really hard for kids. And I got to help out a kiddo just this week, and I love helping the littles calm down. But having transition items is a really big thing. Having something that maybe it's a little bracelet. It doesn't have to be a toy, or it could be a blanket. With COVID, blankets are kind of hard sometimes right now. So it kind of depends on where you're separating from and to. But having some item that reminds them of home. Having rituals and routines and schedules built into their transition is also really going to help the separation. Really working with, as a parent, with whether it's a teacher or a caregiver or a therapist or what have you, onto how you can create that schedule, and then working on regulating, taking breaths, and really sticking to that is usually what I find works the best. I also have had, for kiddos in school, we'll take a picture of the mom, the dad, the primary caregiver, whoever it is, and we laminate it and we make a necklace out of it. And so then they can wear a necklace of mom or dad with their picture, and they just look at the picture, and I'll see little ones just grabbing it and kissing it all day long, and they're fine.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great strategy. Yeah, so I often work more on the preventative side because I'm not often there for the actual separation. And there are some kids who just have a temperament that they feel more anxious around changes, or just don't feel as comfortable with changes. And so one of the things that we work on is preparing them for those changes. So as much as possible, sometimes things happen and it's sudden, and we don't have a way to prepare our kids for that. But so in that case, I would say it's really important to talk with your child afterwards. You know, there was an emergency and you had to leave kiddo with a neighbor and they weren't expecting that. That would be something to talk with them afterwards. I know that was a little scary for you. You weren't expecting that. This is what happened. Here's what to expect in the future. So there's that piece, because anytime young kids don't get an explanation for situations that we as adults understand, but to them feel very confusing and fearful, they will fill in the blanks. And usually it involves, it must have been my fault. I must have done something wrong. So we want to avoid that. And that can definitely create more anxiety too, if they don't know what to expect. Was this something that's going to happen every week? Was this a one-time thing? So then when you can prepare them, like for the beginning preschool, do what you can to make that a familiar transition for them. You as the adult know what's going to happen. You know what a classroom looks like. You have those kinds of frames of reference. They don't. So can you drive past the school and point it out? That's where you're going to go to school. Then maybe next time we go and we play on the outside playground. Now, again, I know these things might not be able to happen right now, but in general, these are kind of some of the things we do. And then can you go stop by once before you start? So find out what you're able to do in the way of introducing them. Most classrooms also offer you can come and meet your teacher, you can see the classroom before you start. And then as a parent, just reminding them, you drop them off and you need to stick with what you tell them. So if you say, I'm going to walk in with you and then I'm going to leave, then that's what you as the parent need to do. Even if they're having a hard time, they're getting upset, it will actually create more anxiety if you don't do what you said you would do. And then be consistent with that. That consistency will over time help them to feel more stable with the change and feel less anxiety. And then I guess along with that, don't avoid making these changes. If you've decided that this is the right thing and the best thing for them and for you as a family, make the change, even if you know it's probably going to be a little bit hard for them and for you. Because if you're wishy-washy about it, if it's like, oh, we're going to start preschool, but then 2 days later, no, we're going to pull you out, barring some kind of unforeseen circumstance, that can also create a lot more anxiety. So just make the decision and then trust that you being consistent in what you're telling your children and in the support that they have in that classroom will be helpful for them. And then lastly, I would say it's really important too, as the adult, to manage your own anxiety, because we all have feelings about separating from our children. We all have fears around that. And we don't even necessarily realize how much our children feel our anxiety and our feelings. It's inevitable. It's part of that attachment bond that our kids have with us. We can't avoid them feeling that. And so if that means that before you leave to take them to school, you need to take some deep breaths and you need to center yourself and you need to remind yourself that they're with professionals who have their best interests at heart, that they are safe, that you have chosen the best place possible for them, whatever it is that you need to do, try to regulate yourself, because that will help them to regulate themselves.
Absolutely, Dayna. And just to reemphasize, because it's so critical, setting the expectations and letting them know what's going to happen, not just with separation and anxiety, but any time in a little one's life, because they have no control over really anything. So in any time that you can prepare them for what's happening, when you're going to the grocery store, what do you expect? We're going to Target. You are not getting a new toy and then you stick to it. That is the key. You stick to it, right? But the other piece of it is when they're having those big feelings, validate them. We don't have to agree with how a child is feeling to validate their experience. Whether that's fear or anxiety or anger or sadness, validate it for them. Let them know that how they're feeling is important to you and that you get it. The example I always give is my daughter is terrified of moths. Always has been. Will have a full-out panic attack, freak out if there's a moth in the bathroom. I don't get it. I'm like, they're gross. I don't like it. But I don't have to agree with that to understand that she's truly terrified. And I need to validate that for her and help her deal with that strong emotion. Sorry, kind of a rabbit hole, but that reminded me.
No, that's a great point. That is a great point.
And we have another question, and this one says, sometimes when my 2-year-old gets angry or frustrated, he will start to hit his head or hit his head against the wall. Is this a normal behavior? I normally grab him and hold him until he calms down. Is this a good way to handle these episodes?
You want me to go first, Dayna? Or do you want it? Okay.
You go for it.
Okay, you'll pick up what I forget. So, yes and no. I think anytime we see our child hurting themselves, it is absolutely terrifying. So first I want to validate that. That's really hard to see as a parent. I think it can be a part of normal development, and sometimes it indicates it may not be. But I never advocate for restraining a child. What I do advocate for is keeping them safe. So if they're hitting their head like against the wall, I'm going to put my hand there or a pillow or something soft while they work it out. And then it's going to go back to that preventative, what do we do when we're angry? What do we do when we're frustrated? And back to what Dayna and I were talking about earlier. So in the moment, you're going to keep them safe. Restrain, I'm not a fan of that for a lot of reasons. One, it can hurt the child, it can hurt the parent. And sometimes kids do need to have closeness to feel safe. So that's a really fine line. And that's something I don't like to give a lot of tips on unless I know the situation. I see Dayna nodding going like, yeah, that's really tricky. But make it as safe as possible while you're teaching them other skills to get that energy out. Dayna, what else do you have for that?
I think that's great. I had the same inclination. And as a parent, that is such a natural response. I'm going to grab my kid because they're being, they run into the road. I'm going to grab them. It feels like a similar thing, like they're banging their head. I need to stop them. But it can actually also create more problems of like, oh, I feel like I'm getting a lot of interaction for this. And not that you absolutely want to be there and be present with them. So it's not that, but if you're physically restraining them, then they can feel like, well, this was my way of showing that I have some control. I am choosing to hit my head into the wall. And so you stopping me, physically preventing me, I may need to find another way to do that. So I've seen kids reroute that into other unsafe, self-harm kinds of things. So I totally agree with Windy. And I think the preventative, this is the hard thing about behavior, is that there is no one thing that you can do. There's no magic wand. I wish there was. So you have to, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of different things, and all together they will start to work, but it does take time and it takes consistency. So that preventative piece of, first, we got to make sure that you have another way to show us you're angry, because right now the only way you think you have to show us you're angry is to bang your head. So there's that. And I like how, Windy, you talked about how it can be a very typical part of development, that some kids, that's the way that they show anger. It can also be, and I don't say this in any way to alarm you, but just because it's my job as a professional. I haven't seen your kid. I don't know anything about your kid. So this is just based on that one behavior. Sometimes kids with other developmental concerns going on, head banging is a way that they, show their frustration. So that doesn't mean that's the case for your child. It does mean it's something to just look at. And are there other developmental concerns going on as well? And if there are, then I would definitely have a conversation with your pediatrician about that. And of course, you can make a referral to us as well, which may be what your pediatrician would ultimately recommend. But I think barring that, if it's just this one behavior and there aren't other concerns, then everything that Windy said is spot on.
Yeah, I think anytime that you have a concern, especially about a child where there's physical concerns, or where there's some self-harm, or you're afraid they're going to get hurt, always talk to your pediatrician about those. I know pediatricians kind of get tired of us saying, well, they cry all the time, or they scream or whatever, but err on the side of caution and tell your pediatrician, because it may be a sign of something else going on. Not saying it is, just that's a rule of thumb I always used and I always tell parents to use.
That is a great point, Windy. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because sometimes as parents, we have to be really strong advocates for our kids. And when they're this young, we're just learning how to be parents. And so it can feel very intimidating being with experts like us or with pediatricians and saying, having them say, oh no, that's just normal. That's what all kids do. But feeling in your gut like there might be something else going on. And again, I'm not speaking to that particular situation, but it just brings up this larger conversation. And one of my children, I experienced this with, they have gone on to get a diagnosis of ADHD. And I knew when they were a baby that something was not typical. and that they were struggling in a way that other kids don't struggle. And my pediatrician at first was pretty dismissive and just felt like it was just normal kid stuff and just difference of temperament. And it turned out that I was right. And so had I not been persistent with saying, no, here's what's going on, and really I had to come to every appointment with, you know, backup. I would write down, he's doing this and he's doing this and this is going on, and here was a situation we ran into. And eventually the pediatrician did see, oh, okay, that there's more going on here. So sometimes you have to really be that advocate as well.
And I was going to ask, what are some questions that both of you tend to get a lot from caregivers? Are there certain topics that you find are very common across the board that you could speak to?
So the participants in this this forum are already hitting on most of the ones I hear all the time. But there is one piece of advice that I always give to parents, to teachers, that I'd be happy to share. Is that appropriate? Okay. And it kind of gets back into biology and brain stuff. And I'll warn everybody on here, I get super excited about brain stuff because I think, you know, we forget that a lot of the behavior is biological, right? So, you know, we have all the different parts of our brain. In the very deep part, we have our emotion center. That's where we have our feelings, our memories, our fight, flight, or freeze responses, right? Very primitive parts of our brains. And then you have the rest of it, which is our thinking brain, right? The cerebral cortex. So that's the part where we think, and the very front where we have logic and impulse control and reasoning and problem solving. And I always remind parents, this very front part of the brain, this doesn't develop fully until age 25. Some research is showing not even until 28 or 30, and they're showing gender differences. So, you know, in kiddos that we are working with, that you all have, this part of the brain is just starting to develop. And so, you know, yeah, they're impulsive because that part of the brain's not well developed yet, and it's not well practiced. And, you know, their personality starts really coming out at this age because that part of the brain is developing, and it's so cool to watch. And when you look at it from that perspective, sometimes as a parent, it makes me say, oh yeah, well, you know, his brain it's just starting to do this stuff, which is really cool. The other piece of it is that our thinking part of the brain communicates with our feeling center, right? And sometimes it's like a light switch. If you think of a light switch on and off. When we are extremely upset, we're angry, we're in an argument. I don't know about you guys, but I've had arguments where I don't remember what I said, right? We get so angry. And when I teach this, everybody's like, yeah, I've done that. It's because your light switch flipped. When you are all in that feelings part of your brain and you are angry and you're sobbing or you're really worked up, that thinking part of your brain is not working. That light is not on. There's this disconnect. And oftentimes with kids, when they're melting down, they're losing it, we're like, hey, what's wrong? Hey, why aren't you talking? In that moment, they literally can't. And as a parent, if you learn how to see when they are in this pure, raw feeling state, when their light switch is flipped, then you know, okay, I need to back off and I'm going to see them start to calm down. And now I'm going to dive in there with what I know I need to do. And I know that has helped a lot of teachers and parents in the past, being able to recognize, because it's so frustrating, even a kiddo that knows how to calm themselves down. They know that hit the pillow when they're upset. And you'd be like, why aren't you hitting the pillow? And they're, blah! They can't hear you in that moment. So I think that's something really important I like to impart on parents and teachers when we're working with kids, especially when they're having behaviors.
That's such a great illustration and such a great point, Wendy. And it reminded me of something that I say a lot, which is, I think a lot of us are doers. We like to do something. We like to solve a problem. And so as parents, we bring that to our parenting. So when our child is melting down, we want to solve their problem because we're in that we're in that problem solving part of our brain. We're not in the emotional part of our brain, but our child, you're right, is in that emotional part. And there is so much power to just being with. And I think that that's true for us too. So think about a time when you yourself were overwhelmed, frustrated, feeling a lot of emotions. Maybe you were venting to your partner or your spouse or a friend. And if they said to you, well, you should just do this, that probably didn't feel great, because we just need somebody to be with us. We're like, I know there are things I can do, but I just need you to be present with me and empathize with me and get that I am feeling this feeling. So I take it back to that idea of we can just be with. Being with is doing. And sometimes we think we need to do more. So just kind of keeping that in mind. I love that idea. And then for me, I would say I would agree with Wendy. Usually the problems come from these areas. So, parents are like, hey, we're going through this behavior or this behavior. So it's what's on the surface. Here's what we're seeing. But there's a whole iceberg underneath of what could be going on. And so I like to look, or I often find that I am with families helping them to look at what is that iceberg. And so there are many things that those icebergs can be. Children are just reflections of what's going on relationally in their world. So the whole idea of an attachment relationship, which is a natural relationship that your child creates with you, that you create with your child by responding to their needs from infancy, and from them learning that they can trust other people and that they can trust the world, they pick up on very subtle cues. Like I was talking about before, if you're anxious, they're picking up on it. And so one thing that I spend a lot of time talking with parents about is self-care, which sounds like it's such a trendy term. It feels like both a helpful and unhelpful thing to say, but it really is very crucially important. If you aren't taking care of yourself, if you aren't meeting your needs, you can't meet their needs. So you may think you can. So an easy example of this is like moms will get so busy that we make lunch for our kids, but we don't think to make lunch for ourselves. And then the day goes by and we realize we haven't eaten much. That's a good example of, well, then you're probably grumpy and irritable and you're not able to be as present and available to your child because you haven't eaten. So it can be as simple as thinking, oh, I need to eat something too. And maybe eating something can also be combined with nap time so that you can have a little break on your own to eat what you want and not have to share with anybody and, not have to be meeting needs at the same time. And I know that sometimes that doesn't overlap for all the different ages and stages of your kids. You may not get that. But if you do, think about using that time to do something that will fill you and energize you. Or maybe, and I know this is hard right now, we have to all be creative, but maybe it's having a group of friends that you get together with either in person or virtually to have those adult interactions as well, because maybe you're with kids all the time, or whatever the case is, just finding those ways to take care of yourself, because it really is taking care of your child at the same time. And we don't always think of that as parents. We think, oh, I've got to meet their needs. I've got to do this for them. I've got to do that. But taking care of yourself is taking care of them.
Very well said, Dayna. I couldn't agree more. An empty pitcher cannot pour.
Maybe I could just add one more thing, unless we have a question.
We do have a question, but add something and then I'll answer.
Okay. I'll make it brief, because this is another thing that comes up usually in relation to something traumatic that's happened within a family. So the death of a loved one, or a parents divorcing, something along those lines. That's a big change, and parents want to know, how do I talk with my kids about this, or what do I do? How do I support them? And we used to think a while ago, a couple decades ago, that it really was not beneficial for young children, that they didn't understand. If we tried to explain these bigger concepts, that they wouldn't understand and there was no benefit. Research has completely debunked that. And children very much, even very young children, research shows even infants. So even if they don't fully cognitively understand the words you use, they need to have an explanation for changes in their lives. So keep it simple. Keep it as simple as you can. Try to use words that they are more likely to understand, but give them an explanation, because in the absence of an explanation, they will feel destabilized, they will feel anxious, and they will blame themselves. because that's developmentally what kids are hardwired to do. So try to find some kind of a simple explanation to tell them what's going on, what they can expect, and reassure them that they are loved and that they are taken care of. So emphasize what their physical, tangible world is going to look like, how that is going to change, because they're very in the moment, and what isn't going to change. So whatever the change is, that's really applicable to any situation.
And luckily, there are a ton of books on various topics, and you are all members of the library with beautiful access to that. I do that little plug, but seriously, there are a lot of books to really help at various age levels, to help with difficult conversations. When you're explaining these things for the young ones, anytime you can use visuals or pictures to help make the connection in their brain, you're going to get more bang for your buck.
Thank you for the library plug. And also I was going to say, I know a lot of parents are concerned about coming in to browse and look for books when they have little ones because they maybe can't keep an eye on them. They're worried they're going to act up. You can always call your library branch and we will gladly pull books in advance for you. And we don't care if they're loud or anything. It's the part. If people don't like it, then they may need to go to the other part of the library. But if you, I know I've had some moms that it just truly is, they just can't handle that. Call ahead. We will pull books for you and gear the books for you. Now, we did have a question. We actually have two. The first question is, our 2-year-old often screams. We have given into this before. So at times she will scream to get what she wants or when she's upset. How do we redirect this behavior? And also, secondly, they're just curious if either of you or both of you agree with spanking, and what are appropriate ways to discipline when it's needed.
Well, those are two big questions in one. So for the screaming, I'd go back to a lot of what we said previously about the other behaviors. They need to have an alternative. So make sure you're teaching that at a time when they're not upset. With screaming, if they have any words that they can use, that can be very helpful to replace it with a word. So if they're screaming because they don't like what's going on, teaching them, I call them self-advocacy words like no or stop. Those are big topic, big things that come up with other kids and interacting with other kids, and maybe they don't like that someone took their toy. So teaching them just a simple one word that they can learn. If they're not verbal yet, then like for some of the other behaviors, just teaching alternatives, teaching a gesture if they don't have those words. As far as spanking, I know this is a really hot button topic, and we don't have a ton of time to delve too deeply in it. What I will say is that the research, and I like approaching it from a scientific perspective. If I'm as a parent, I want the most bang for my buck. If I'm doing something, I want it to work. Spanking has been shown not to actually support what we want it to. So we want our children to choose different behaviors. We want them to choose a more acceptable alternative. If we purely consequence them, particularly in this under 3 age group where they don't have the ability to find those alternatives themselves, we're really not solving the problem. So we have to teach them those alternatives and then help encourage them to use them. That is the most powerful, quote unquote, discipline that you can use at this age. So spanking, what that strategy has shown to produce is actually kids that as they get older, they don't actually choose better behaviors. They tend to actually hide their behaviors that we wouldn't want them to have. And so for me as a parent, when I read about that research, that really informed my decision in discipline. And so as they get older, true discipline does make sense. But in these younger years, I mean, you can use the timeout or you can use some other method, but it really has not been shown in research to work. What has been shown to be supportive feels very counterintuitive to a lot of us, which is that just being through the emotion, keeping them and others safe, and then when they're calm, talking about, alternatives and especially at times where it's not even surrounding the hot button issue, teaching them other alternatives, other ways that they can express themselves and get their wants and needs met. Do you have anything to add, Wendy?
No, that the research was exactly what I was going to hit on. But I will say, through my career and working with many, many families, even on this topic. I think, while I don't think the research supports it, I think it's an individual family decision. I think that it's, in any discipline, it's best when both parents are on the same page, to make sure that whatever discipline is used is effective and consistent. I've had families that won't spank at all. I have families that would spank for everything. And I've had families that spank only for the really intense stuff, like the kid ran out in the road and then they gave them a swat, and that made the connection for them. So I don't think that it's the most effective way to discipline, because if you look up discipline, it means to teach and to guide, right? So we want to teach and to guide, and research shows that spanking doesn't get it done, but I think it's an individual family decision, and I always want to respect what a family wants to do. It is legal in Colorado to spank with an open hand. You don't get called on to DHS for spanking with an open hand. So I think that's kind of where it is.
And we have one more question, and this I think will have to be our final question. My daughter is almost 2, and I am expecting my second baby in a couple of months. Do you have any advice for going from one child to 2 kids? And how can I help the transition for my daughter as she becomes a big sister?
Congratulations. It's the number one thing is grace. Oh, Lord, show yourself, your partner, your children, everybody grace, because you're all going to have to adapt to a new life now. There's a lot of really great books, again, books for welcoming the baby brother, baby sister, making your kiddo a part of any baby showers, and they get special big sibling gifts. I've seen a lot of families do that and make them excited. They always think, well, I'm going to help take care of the baby. And at 2, maybe kiddo will go and grab a diaper or something. And that's their version of helping. So just making sure that your kiddo is involved with baby, that you're setting aside one-on-one time with kiddo after baby comes. So they still get that special mommy time, because they're going to need that. Until baby comes, soak up every moment with that only child for as much as you can. That will help your mommy heart too. That's personal advice. Sorry.
Great stuff, and hit on lots of the points that I would make. One of the things that a lot of families that I've worked with in early intervention have adopted and have found success with is getting a doll, a baby doll, if they don't already have one, before baby comes, and kind of talking about some of those things that babies do. Babies sleep a lot. Babies cry because they can't talk like you can. Maybe an almost 2-year-old can talk. So, they don't have words like you do. They just have to cry every single time they need anything. And so talking, because that can be something that's very unexpected for an older sibling, that, oh, they cry so much. And then the other thing that's often outside of their realm is that they're going to take your attention, that you're going to need to pay attention to them. And sometimes it's very focused. So thinking through the things that you're going to need to do with your baby that will occupy some of your attention, and what your child's job can be during that time. So I've had families that their kiddo struggled when mom was nursing or was bottle feeding. Well, maybe older sibling can get their doll and they can bottle feed their doll while you're feeding baby. Or maybe they can look at books and you can actually look at books while you're feeding baby as well. Like during diaper changes, like Wendy was saying, can they be the one that go and get the diaper and the wipes for you? Sometimes we don't think about that in the moment because we're just trying to be efficient, but allowing them to be involved helps to keep them from feeling excluded from the responsibilities involved with baby. And also there are lots of great books, like Wendy's plug. There are lots of great books for kids becoming siblings, having a sibling born.
Yep. One other thing you reminded me of, I'm sorry, Melissa, I will be very, very quick. One other thing that you reminded me of is that expectation. They think baby's gonna come home and they're gonna get to play with them all the time, and now they have an in-house playmate. And that's another thing that doesn't register until they're like, when can they play with me? They're really boring. So setting that expectation that it's gonna be a while, and letting them know what they can do with baby.
Thank you. And I was just gonna, I had my son and daughter are exactly 2 years apart. And so I nursed, and that was our big reading time. And they are both to this day really big readers. We always had a stack of library books. Every time we nursed, which was all the time, we read. So a fun bonding time for all three of us. So I'd like to thank both of our panelists today, Dayna Webb and Windy Doan. Wonderful job. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I just have a few reminders that I want to share with you. And first of all, there are 3 sessions still left of our Parenting Little Ones. Next week on October 15th, we will be talking about early literacy, and we're going to have 3 librarians that'll be on the panel. And then the week of October 22nd, we will be talking about music and second languages. On October 29th, the last Thursday in October, we will be talking about speech and development. And you can visit our PPLD website to register for any remaining sessions. I will be sending a survey out later today, and once you submit that, you will be entered into the drawing for a gift card. And then also I want to let you know, if anyone out there, we have a lot of 2-year-olds, but if any of you has a 4-year-old or a child that will be 4 or was 4 in 2020, they will be able to take part in One Book Colorado. That starts next Tuesday, October 13th, and we will be having a free book and giving it to every 4-year-old that comes into the library. And you can pick this up at any of our library locations. There are 3 wonderful books that are in the run for the prize, or to be the giveaway book, and it will be announced on Tuesday. And we will also be having special take and makes for 4-year-olds, and both of those are while supply lasts. And then the last thing is, if you could remember, we have our Family and Children Services programs that are available on our YouTube channel. And so we have story time, baby time, toddler time, and many other activities that you can do with your child. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.